My name is Nora Bishop, and the night my father asked me for my debit card just for emergencies, I didn't hand it over. I walked into the bathroom of his house, locked the door, opened my banking app, and froze every account I had, checking, savings, both credit cards, before he'd even finished his sentence in the other room. That was the first thing that happened. The second thing happened 4 minutes later while I was still sitting on the edge of his bathtub with my phone in my hand. A push notification lit up my screen. Attempted transaction declined, Bishop Nora, card ending 4471, $2,380, Meridian Electronics. My card. A store 40 minutes from my father's house. A purchase I hadn't made, hadn't authorized, and hadn't even known was being attempted, until the freeze I'd triggered out of pure gut instinct blocked it in real time. I sat on that bathtub edge for a long time before I went back out to the living room. My father, Gary Bishop, was sitting in his recliner with the football game muted, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just asked his 27-year-old daughter to hand over access to her bank account, just in case something comes up. I want to tell you I confronted him right then. I didn't. I said I was tired, said I was heading up to bed early, and I lay awake most of that night with my phone on my chest, staring at that decline notification, trying to understand how my father had a card number he was never given. It took me the better part of 5 months to find out. And when I finally did, the number $2,380 turned out to be the smallest part of it. Quick question before we get into it, where are you watching from tonight? And are you the type who'd have handed the card over to keep the peace, or the type who'd have said no on the spot? I ask because I used to be the first kind of person. This story is basically the story of how I stopped being her. I should explain why my gut reacted the way it did, because on paper, my dad asking to borrow my card doesn't sound like a 5-alarm fire. Parents ask their adult kids for help sometimes. That's normal. This wasn't the first time though, and the last time had gone very differently than just for emergencies. 2 years earlier, during the week of my mother's funeral, my dad had asked to borrow my card to cover some of the immediate costs, the funeral home deposit, a few things for the reception afterward, while his own accounts were tied up because of a business loan draw that hadn't cleared yet. I said yes without thinking twice. I was 25, grieving, and it genuinely did not occur to me to ask for an itemized list from a man burying his wife. I found out 3 weeks later, when my statement came, that helping with funeral costs had also included a $1,900 charge at a landscaping equipment supplier, a $640 charge for a hotel stay 2 towns over that had nothing to do with the funeral, and a handful of smaller purchases I couldn't account for at all. When I brought it up gently at a family dinner, my stepmother Denise told me I was being incredibly insensitive to bring up money during a time of grief. My younger sister Casey wouldn't look at me. My dad just said, "I'll pay you back when things settle down," and things never really settled down, and I never saw that money again, and I learned the hard way to stop asking. So when he asked for my card again 2 years later over Thanksgiving weekend, just for emergencies, I didn't say yes. I said I needed to think about it. And I went and froze everything before he even noticed I'd left the room. I didn't sleep much that first night. Around 1 in the morning, I got up for water and heard voices through the thin wall between the guest room and my dad's home office. His voice and Denise's, low, but not low enough. "She's going to notice eventually," Denise was saying. "You can't keep doing this every time the business account runs dry." "She won't notice if I move fast enough," my dad said. "I just need until the Hendricks job pays out in December. It's 12 grand, that covers everything. And if she checks her credit report before then, you know what happened with the Meridian thing tonight." There was a long pause. Then my dad said something that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "She's not going to check her credit report, Denise. She's never once checked it in her life. Why would she start now?" I stood in that hallway for a long time after that, in the dark, in socks, feeling like the floor of my own family had just quietly given out beneath me. I didn't understand yet what the Meridian thing or the Hendricks job meant, but I understood with total clarity that this wasn't a one-time ask. This was a pattern. And Denise, my stepmother, a woman I'd never particularly loved but had never suspected of anything either knew about it, was maybe even involved in it. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. And the second I got home 2 days later, I pulled my credit report for the first time in my adult life. I want to walk you through this the way I experienced it because it didn't come all at once. It came in layers, each one worse than the last, the way these things usually do. The first thing I noticed on my credit report was an account I didn't recognize. A store credit card through a company called Praxis Home and Garden Financing, opened when I was 19 years old. I had never shopped at a store called Praxis Home and Garden in my life. The account had a credit limit of $8,000, a current balance of $6,140, and a payment history that showed it as 30, 60, and at one point 90 days past due more than once over the years. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that account information for probably 20 minutes before I could make myself keep reading. The billing address on file wasn't mine. It was my dad's address, the house I'd grown up in, the same house I'd just spent Thanksgiving weekend in. The math started coming together slowly, painfully. I was 19 the year that account opened. That was the same year my dad had asked me, as I was filing my very first tax return as a working college student, for my social security number for the paperwork, saying he needed it to keep me on his insurance a little longer. I'd handed it over without a second thought. Why wouldn't I? He was my father. He'd used it to open a store credit line in my name, sent all the statements to his own address so I'd never see a single bill, and quietly built up over $6,000 of debt under my identity that had been sitting on my credit file, invisible to me, for 8 years. That was layer 1. I called the number on the credit report for Praxis Home and Garden Financing the next morning, shaking so badly I had to write my own name and account number on a sticky note just to get through the automated system without losing my place. The representative I finally reached, a man named Oswaldo, told me something that made layer 1 feel almost quaint by comparison. "I'm showing 2 accounts under this social security number, ma'am," he said. "The Praxis card and a linked equipment financing account through our commercial partner opened 4 years ago. That one's under a business name, Bishop Landscape Solutions." I didn't own a business. I had never owned a business. I asked him to repeat what he'd said twice because I genuinely thought I'd misheard. I hadn't. 4 years earlier, when my dad's landscaping company had needed a new commercial mower and trailer set up, he had applied for equipment financing using my social security number as a cosigner, without my knowledge, without my signature, or rather, with a signature that wasn't mine at all, but close enough to pass on a scanned application form. That loan was for $18,700. The current balance, after 4 years of what Oswaldo delicately called inconsistent payment history, was just over $14,000. Combined with the Praxis card, that put the total at just over $20,000 of debt sitting under my name, tied to my father's business, that I had never agreed to and had never known existed. And that still wasn't the full number. That came a few weeks later, and it came from my sister. My sister Casey is 4 years younger than me, and growing up, she was always closer to Dad than I was his buddy on job sites in high school, the one who actually wanted to learn the business side of the landscaping company. I hadn't told her yet what I'd found. I wasn't sure how to, honestly, without it sounding like an accusation against the whole family, her included. She called me on her own on a Tuesday night in January, her voice thin in a way I'd never heard from her. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not hate me before I finish." She told me that about 8 months earlier. She'd been helping Dad organize paperwork for his accountant and had come across a folder labeled, simply, N. Inside were copies of documents with my name and social security number on them, the Praxis card application, the equipment financing paperwork, and a third document she hadn't understood at the time. An application for a $12,000 personal line of credit through a different lender entirely, dated just 5 months earlier, also denied, but the application itself still sitting there. "I asked him about it," Casey said. "He told me it was old paperwork from when he had you on the family insurance plan, that it didn't mean anything anymore." I wanted to believe him. I think some part of me knew that wasn't true, and I didn't push because I didn't want it to be true. "I'm sorry, Nora, I should have told you 8 months ago." The line of credit application had been denied, thank God for that, at least, because by that point my credit utilization from the Praxis card and the equipment loan had pushed my score low enough that no lender would approve it. In a strange, backward way, my father's own debt against my identity was the thing that had finally stopped him from taking on more of it in my name. I asked Casey the question I'd been afraid to ask. Did Denise know? All of it, not just the card thing at Thanksgiving? Casey was quiet for a second. I think Denise has known for years, Nora. I think she's the one who helped him figure out how to do the second one, actually. She used to work loan processing before she married Dad. She'd know how to make an application like that look clean. That was the moment the story stopped being about one bad night over Thanksgiving and became about something that had been running quietly under my entire adult life. I want to be honest with you about something. For about 10 days after that call with Casey, I didn't do anything at all. I went to work, I answered emails, I made dinner. I told exactly no one outside my sister what was going on, because some enormous, exhausted part of me needed to just sit with it before I could function like a person who was about to fight her own father. What finally moved me was an email from my mortgage pre-approval process. I'd been working with a lender for almost 2 months, hoping to buy a small condo that spring, informing me that my application had been denied due to elevated credit utilization and derogatory payment history. I read that email standing in my kitchen and felt something in me go very cold, very clear, very still. The next morning, I called the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft reporting line and filed an official report. It took 40 minutes and generated a case number and a personalized recovery plan, step 1 of which was placing a full fraud alert and eventually a credit freeze across all 3 credit bureaus, something I should have done the night I overheard that hallway conversation, but hadn't known enough to do yet. Step 2 was filing formal dispute letters with both Praxis Home and Garden Financing and the Equipment Financing Company, including a copy of the FTC report, requesting the accounts be investigated as fraudulent and removed from my credit file. Step 3, the one that scared me the most, was filing a police report. I sat in a small interview room at the county sheriff's substation with a detective named Alma Reyes, who specialized in financial crimes, and walked her through everything: the Thanksgiving card request, the overheard conversation, the credit report, Casey's call, the folder labeled, and Detective Reyes was calm and methodical in a way that helped me stay calm too. She explained that identity theft committed by a parent against an adult child is more common than most people assume, and legally treated no differently than identity theft committed by a stranger. The relationship doesn't change what the law calls it. I have to ask you directly, she said, because people change their minds partway through this process constantly, and I'd rather know now. Do you want this pursued as a criminal matter against your father specifically, or are you primarily trying to clear the debt from your name? I told her honestly that I didn't know yet. What I did know was that I needed the debt gone, and I needed a paper trail that made it undeniable for the bureaus, for the lenders, for my own sanity. She filed the report as an open investigation, which, and this mattered enormously later, gave every dispute letter I sent to Praxis and the equipment company a case number to reference, transforming my claims from "a woman says this isn't her debt" into "an active law enforcement identity theft investigation confirms this account is disputed as fraudulent." Within 3 weeks, Praxis Home and Garden Financing froze the account pending investigation. The equipment financing company took longer, almost 7 weeks, and required a notarized identity theft affidavit and a handwriting comparison between my actual signature and the one on the loan application, which, unsurprisingly, did not match. I didn't confront my dad until the investigation was already moving, on purpose. Priya Anand, a consumer protection attorney Detective Reyes had recommended, advised me to have everything locked in before I had that conversation, so it couldn't turn into him talking me out of something I hadn't yet made official. I met him at a diner near his house on a Sunday morning in February, alone, no Denise, no Casey. He knew something was coming. I could see it in the way he was already tense before I'd said a word. "I know about Praxis," I said. "I know about the equipment loan. I know about the folder labeled N. I know Denise helped you fill out at least one of those applications. And I know you tried to run a $2,380 charge on my card the same night you asked to borrow it before I'd even said yes." He didn't deny it. That surprised me more than anything else in the entire story. He just put his coffee cup down and said quietly, "The business has been underwater for 3 years, Nora. I didn't know how else to keep it running without losing everything your mother and I built. I told myself I'd pay it back before you ever needed to know. You used my social security number when I was 19 years old," I said. "That's not borrowing, Dad. That's not an emergency ask. That's identity theft, and there's an open police report with my name on it because of it." He went very pale at that. He hadn't known about Detective Ray's yet. I watched him do the math in real time, the same math I'd been doing for months, and understand, for the first time, that this wasn't going to be something he could quietly pay down before it settled itself out. Here's where the story gets genuinely complicated, and I want to be honest about that complexity instead of flattening it into something simpler than it was. My father's landscaping business, the one he'd built from a single truck and a push mower over 22 years, could not survive both the fraud investigation and the sudden freeze of the credit lines it had been quietly running on. Within 4 months of that diner conversation, he was forced to lay off both of his remaining full-time crew members. By late summer, he'd sold most of the commercial equipment, including, with a kind of dark irony I couldn't ignore, the very mower and trailer setup the fraudulent loan had originally financed, to cover what remained of his legitimate business debts. I want to be clear, I didn't do that to him. The business had been failing under its own weight for years, propped up by debt he'd taken out under my name because his own credit was already too damaged to qualify for financing honestly. My reporting the fraud didn't create that failure. It just removed the one dishonest thing that had been temporarily disguising it. That didn't make it easy to watch. There were nights that summer I genuinely doubted myself, wondered if I'd been too harsh, too fast to involve the police instead of trying to handle it quietly within the family, the way Casey, at least initially, had wanted. Priya told me something during one of our calls that I still think about. You're allowed to feel sad about the consequences and still know you did the right thing. Those two things aren't in conflict. By September, 10 months after that Thanksgiving weekend, both fraudulent accounts had been formally removed from my credit file, backdated, which restored my credit score almost entirely within about 2 billing cycles. Praxis Home and Garden Financing wrote off the $6,140 balance as fraud loss. The equipment financing company was less forgiving. Because a portion of that loan had genuinely been used, the debt didn't simply disappear. It transferred through a legal process Priya walked me through called a fraud liability reassignment, fully onto my father, now attached to his name and his name alone, exactly where it always should have been. Detective Ray's investigation concluded with enough evidence to support charges, but ultimately, at my request, the case was resolved through a pretrial diversion agreement rather than prosecution. My father accepted formal responsibility on record, agreed to restitution terms, and avoided a criminal conviction, provided he complied fully for 2 years. I went back and forth on that decision more than any other part of this story. Some part of me, the part that had spent 3 sleepless months staring at a $6,140 balance that wasn't mine, wanted him to face harder consequences than a diversion agreement. But another part of me, the part that still remembered him teaching me to ride a bike in the same driveway where he'd later signed my name to a loan application, couldn't make myself push for prison. I don't know if that makes me generous or just tired. Maybe both. Denise's role was harder to formally prove. She'd never signed anything herself, but she and my father separated that fall regardless, for reasons I was never fully told and honestly didn't ask about. My relationship with my father is not what it used to be, and I don't think it ever will be again, and I've made peace with that being the honest outcome instead of forcing something that isn't true. We speak maybe once a month now, briefly, mostly logistics. A shared storage unit we still need to split up. A few boxes of my mother's things he finally agreed to send me. He apologized once genuinely in a letter rather than in person, which surprised me. He wrote that he understood if I never fully trusted him again and that he didn't expect me to. I appreciated the honesty of that more than I expected to. Casey and I are closer now than we've ever been, which is a strange, unexpected gift buried inside all of this. She's been in therapy since that January phone call, working through her own guilt about the folder about the months of silence. We talk every week now. She's helping me pick paint colors for the condo I finally closed on in October, once my credit had recovered enough to qualify. I think about that Thanksgiving night constantly, not the diner confrontation, not the police report, but that first moment, sitting on the edge of my father's bathtub, freezing my accounts before I even understood why my gut was screaming at me to do it. I've asked myself since then what would have happened if I just handed over the card the way I did 2 years earlier at my mother's funeral. I think the debt would have kept growing, quietly, under my name, for years, maybe until it was too large to ever fully untangle. Before I close this out, if you'd overheard that hallway conversation the way I did, Would you have gone straight to a credit report the next morning, or would you have needed more proof first, the way Casey did? I think about how differently this could have gone if I'd waited even a few more months. Let me know where you land in the comments. If there's one practical thing I want to leave you with beyond the story itself, it's this. Pull your own credit report today, this week, even if nothing feels wrong. I went 27 years without checking mine, and in that time, a person I trusted completely used my identity to build a debt I didn't know existed for the better part of a decade. It's free, it takes 15 minutes, and it is the single most boring, unglamorous form of protecting yourself that actually works. The other thing I'd say is less practical and harder to explain. Trusting your gut when something feels slightly off, even when you can't yet articulate why, even when the person asking is someone who's never given you an obvious reason not to trust them, isn't paranoia. It's information. My hands knew something was wrong before my brain had caught up to why. I'm grateful every day that I listened to them. I don't think this story has a clean villain, even though I know that's not always what people want to hear in a story like this. My father did something genuinely unforgivable to me, financially and emotionally, over the better part of 8 years. He also spent 22 years building something out of nothing, taught me to change a tire in that same driveway, sat with me every night for 2 weeks after my mother died. Both of those things are true about the same man. Holding both of them at once has been the hardest part of this entire year, harder than any dispute letter or notarized affidavit. What I know for certain is that I'm no longer the person who hands over her card to keep the peace. I'm no longer the person who waits 2 years and a funeral's worth of grief before asking hard questions about where her money went. I froze those accounts on instinct before I understood why, and that instinct turned out to be the most honest thing in my entire relationship with my father. I don't know if he and I will ever be close again. I know that I'll never again mistake silence in myself or from the people around me for peace. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. Takeaway: protecting yourself from someone you love isn't a betrayal of them, it's often the only honest thing left to do.